and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9. I'm Paul Kretschmer. In the second of 2 days of conversation with Pastor Jeff Peabody about his book, Perfectly Suited, The Armor of God for the Anxious Mind. My next question to him regards our expectations versus God's in our Christian life. In terms of growth, do we see our own growth in radically different terms than the way the Lord sees it or expects from us?
Yeah, I think I always had the assumption that as I grew in my Christian walk, that it was almost like the cross was there for getting things started. And the more mature I was in faith, the less and less I would need the cross because I wouldn't be sinning as much, and so therefore I would be kind of growing away from it. And I think God sees it more the opposite, that we, Paul says we grow in grace. We don't grow out of it. And I think the longer we walk with Him and the closer our relationship becomes with Him, the more we realize our need for the cross, and the cross really looms larger. I think maturity ends up being more recognizing our need more and more, rather than just cultivating our own sense of perfection and holiness on our own. And so, yeah, I think that's been a flip for me as well, to go, it's actually needing the cross more rather than less.
That sounds consistent with the lyrics of a song we play here sometimes, which is more of you and less of me. Yes,
exactly.
How does entrusting God with all these aspects of our lives then function as a shield? Because that is part of the title of your written book.
Right. Well, I think that was the thing. I began to look at the armor of God a little bit differently because, as I said, growing up in a Christian home, I had learned about the armor of God all the time growing up and singing about it, hearing messages about it, and the emphasis for me had always been on the picking up and putting on of the armor, and again, that puts it back on my effort to hold and maintain this, when really the idea is it's God's armor and it's a gift to us, and I think really ultimately it comes down to Christ and our ultimate defense before God, our ultimate defense before God's judgment is Christ taking on our judgment for us. And so then he himself becomes our shield and our protection, and he's our safety when we're with him. But that's God's gift, and it was helpful to me to read in Paul's passage that in Ephesians where he says to pick up and put on the armor, it could really be translated to sink into the armor, and I like that because that's so much less about my effort, and it's you sink into a couch or something, and it's recognizing what He has there for us already.
I'm going to ask a question kind of with a view towards someone who has just become a Christian. They've turned their life over to Jesus Christ. They've sought forgiveness, and He has forgiven them, and redemption is theirs. How often do you think people get derailed early on in their walk with the Lord because they have the illusion that now that I belong to Jesus, the problems that everyone else deals with who doesn't know Him are all going to magically disappear, and it's going to be wonderful. And then when the first big thing comes along, that's very human and very, very daunting, it tends to put a serious cloud of question marks or anxiety in their mind because they thought things were going to be wonderful, and yet they're still dealing with some of the same issues that other people do.
Right. I think that's something that even people who have been Christians for a long time can find themselves having these expectations that it means something different, and that having faith should be that it's not working if these things are happening, and so then that actually ends up making some things really difficult because then when we do feel anxious, then we feel like not only are we feeling bad or afraid or worried, but we feel bad about feeling bad because we read verses that talk about don't be anxious or don't be worried, and we feel like there's something wrong with our faith then if we're feeling these very human emotions, because we think, well, it must not be a very Christian thing for me to be experiencing this, or my faith, something's wrong with my faith. And I think I've come to read those verses a little differently now with my own experience of anxiety, and going, I think it's less about reprimand and more reassurance. It's more the way a parent would talk to a frightened child that says, "Oh, you don't need to be worried. I have that for you." And there's more care in it, and less of a sense of scolding, I think.
Is it possible for a believer to unwittingly follow after a snare that the enemy has put forth because they think that a remedy is immediately available, but one ultimately proves not to be of Jesus, but rather of Satan?
Oh, I think we fall into snares all the time because, so many things just look like they're going to be a solution to us. I think, Paul talks, when he's talking about the armor, he talks about those flaming arrows, and I think really the devil just has two main ones that he uses on us. He, either the kind of arrow that says, I'm not good enough for God, those kinds of messages that are constantly messages of shame and messages of accusation. He's called the great accuser. And so that's one kind of arrow that he shoots at us. And then the other kind is that God's not good enough for me. And that's where we find temptations, that there's something else out there that's going to work better for us than what God's offering us. And so we can fall for either of those, I think, on a pretty regular basis.
Would you say that regular Bible reading on your part, daily devotions and so on, is one way for a person to stay grounded in the Lord and keep focused on them even when they're facing difficult circumstances?
Yeah, I found myself really reaching on to and reaching out for and holding on to the Word in a new way. It was like somebody just dying of thirst, just gulping it down, and I needed it constantly. I would say that the other thing that proved really significant and important for me was to lean into relationships. I mean, I think, right off the bat in Scripture, God said it wasn't good for people to be alone, and so often when we are in a place of deep despair and anxiety, we withdraw and we want to isolate, and it could be a sense of shame or again a sense of self-protection, and one of the best things for me in my own anxiety was to lean into relationships and experience the grace of God through other people. That proved really powerful.
Thank you very much for your time, sir. Pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been great to be here.
That concludes this two-part series with the Reverend Jeff Peabody, author of the book Perfectly Suited, The Armor of God for the Anxious Mind. For further information, call us at 860-346-1049. That's 860-346-1049, or email to office@wihsradio.org. That's office@wihsradio.org. The WIHS Journal is public affairs from 104.9 WIHS.